Welcome to Re-Review, where we watch movies from our past with a perspective from today. Your hosts are Matt, Bobby, and Austin, and we have a love for the films from our youth, so we're taking a look back to see if they still hold up. On this episode, we're discussing All Dogs Go to Heaven. Released in 1989, it was directed by Don Bluth, Gary Goldman, and Dan Munster. Stars Dom DeLuise, Burt Reynolds, and Loni Anderson. This movie tells us the importance of relationships. Now, this is a fair warning. We're spoiling a 33-year-old film, so if you haven't seen it, we will be revealing key plot points. Matt, did you want to make us cry?
That wasn't my intention, no. I mean, did you though? I mean, watching this, I mean, I know the go-to for making people cry is the dog movie. Mm-hmm. I mean, any dog movie I can think of right now is got the tears going, but I don't think I ever associated this movie with crying, to be honest.
This was on my list for I thought was going to be automatic tears without question, and really? I did not shed a single tear, but I assumed I was going to because dogs.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean it's in the title that a dog is going to die, so I mean it's like the first 20 minutes that it occurs. So I mean it's not necessarily a secret. It's weird because like I did not watch this in theaters. It was a little bit before my time. But I do remember wearing the VHS like to death watching this movie as a kid. Mm-hmm. But even then, I don't know if I actually ever cried watching it. Definitely looking back and watching it now, I don't remember it being as dark and as adult themed as it was. And like, don't get me wrong, this isn't like adult theme, like, but there was a lot of gambling and drinking and smoking. And I know that ain't definitely Disney friendly. Like you never see that nowadays.
I would argue that it was very adult themed. And I think that was probably one of the most surprising things to me that my memory called back on going, so I was really seeing a lot of very dark themes as a kid.
I was also pretty surprised by that. I didn't remember any of that at all, which made me question how much of this movie do I actually really remember, which seems like really not a lot at all.
Yeah, me personally, like I remembered bits and pieces of it. Like I remembered that there were characters in it, but the more adult, like I don't think I understood the rat race at the beginning as a kid. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like I didn't like, I mean, I can go ahead and say it now, but there's a lot of animal based gambling in this. And I don't think that they were all dog based gambling because money was being won and the animals don't have cash. So the humans were racing frogs.
Yeah.
And gambling on it. So clearly in the 1930s, Louisiana, there was a lot of gambling based animal events. I mean, including kangaroo fights. So I don't remember any of that. Like I do visually remember it being darker. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of movies during this time were like, Fievel and Secret of the NIMH and like a whole bunch of them during this time period. Like this is right before the Renaissance from Disney. Like I'm pretty sure this was the same year that Little Mermaid came out. So like this was kind of where a lot of these movies were during this time. During like the mid to late 80s, you got these, it almost looked like they were painting on black. Mm-hmm. Very few bright saturated scenes in this. They were very much in the dark color scheme. Like kind of reminds me of the old Batman animated show in the 90s. Mm-hmm. The way how dark and almost noir they were.
For some of the really bright animations, it's like the black outline. And for this, I noticed there was like a lot of the white outline around like her hair in particular and a lot of the stuff because it was very like both thematically and visually dark.
Well, I mean, we're assuming this is all hand drawn, right? Computers weren't necessarily the dominant form of doing art. These are probably actually cells.
Yeah, it seemed like a pretty good chunk of it was traditional hand-drawn animation.
But I think I do want to go back to the idea of the themes that we're presented with, or especially the adult nature of this film. Anything that stood out to you, Matt, in terms of a specific item here?
As far as the adult side, I mean, it's interesting because I mean, obviously, there's the aspects that we've already talked about as far as like the gambling and kidnapping and for some odd reason, dogs drinking beer. But I do think that it's an interesting topic that you didn't even really see during that time period of, it doesn't play heavy into the religious aspect, but I can't think of very many mainstream animated movies that really delved into that. Especially ones that you'd see like theatrical releases for. I can only think of a handful that really delve anything to do with religion at all. None of them Disney related. So the fact that, they talk about heaven, and it's very loosely talked about, right? It's almost a child's version of the topic. And I don't remember anywhere in any religious text talking about a hand watch being able to bring you back to life. So that's something different.
You missed that verse?
I suppose so.
That would be a hell of an option. It is interesting to kind of see them juxtapose the idea of heaven, and then you do get elements of hell brought into this, and even sort of quite a few devil-like references, if not an image of the devil, him or herself. Bobby, what about you in terms of these adult themes? I'll ask you outright. Would you show this movie to your kid?
I mean, my kid particularly is kind of skittish, so I don't think she's ready for this. And I watched the other Bluth movie, The Secret of Nim, and that movie absolutely scared the crap out of me when I was a kid. I remember like being like legitimately frightened by it, but it reminded me a lot of movies that we seem to talk about a lot, which are, It's a Wonderful Life and A Christmas Carol kind of thing, where something has to change, like it's either like you see your future or you are presented with some kind of alternative outcome. And it's like, okay, I don't like what I see and things need to change. But I don't know, the main dog, like, it didn't really seem like he was super redeemable until really like the very, very end. It's not like he earned his right to escape out of heaven. He basically like used what he always used, which was his like thievery and conniving to escape out of heaven.
Was that even enough? I mean, I definitely found it interesting that it seemed like that theme being redemption is possible for everyone that they were setting up, but you're absolutely right. It was one good act.
He did do the one good thing of like trying to save the girl at the very end, but I mean, really, like when he said, hey, I'm using the girl for my own purposes, I really believed that. I mean, because it really seemed like that's what he was doing. And I would have liked to have seen a little more of, hey, there was the scene of, okay, I feel bad for the girl, let's buy her some clothes. But it really didn't seem to be a whole lot of very much redemption worthy stuff until that one thing in the very, very end.
It reminded me a lot of, there was a point watching it where I felt like I was on Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. If you've ever been to Disneyland,
For sure.
There's just this element of debauchery and darkness, and then you're in hell, and then the ride's over. And he just got the extra benefit. Charlie got the extra benefit of getting the redemption ticket to go back to heaven, ? But it just, yeah.
I thought a lot about the other Disney ride, which is Pinocchio. And it seemed like, there was a lot of similarities to me about Pinocchio, because in Pinocchio there was the island, where all the kids turn into donkeys because they're acting like jackasses, right? And like there was a lot of, the adult kind of themes in that kind of one too, which, was a little bit extreme, and they turned that into a little kiddie ride too.
But I guess looking back at these themes and looking at these characters, especially the idea of it's around this girl who's kidnapped by what is essentially a mob boss, who is then rescued, but then still also used for her ability to talk to animals. It just feels really like a really, really weird setup, and she's just looking for a family. Like, this whole thing was kind of sad. And not in the crying way, though.
No, it was very sad, and it made me uncomfortable, frankly. It really did. I mean, and intentionally, but she was very, very sweet of a character. She was like they had talked about like, oh, like all dogs go to heaven because all people like are, they're not good like dogs and they don't deserve to go to heaven. Well, they showed me the exact opposite in this movie and all their human speaking characters. There's the two adults, I'll say, who, the couple who are willing to take in this child and have concern about this child. And then there's the girl who's as sweet as can be. And so it's like, wait a minute, like, what are you talking about? Like, all these dogs are gambling and drinking and doing all this illegal activity, and all the humans seem to be sweet as can be. I was a little bit confused by that.
Like just juxtaposing innocence against all, again, back to the adult themes. You talked about like our memory of what this film was, and especially just kind of being surprised against these themes. One of the things that I did feel like I remember was the music. And I know, Matt, you were surprised for a moment that there was actually singing in this film, but there was an element of the songs kind of brought me back. And by the time we had the gigantic alligator singing song, I was just like, oh, I actually remember all this. For some reason, the music held on to me, and I thankfully forgot about how dark this movie was.
I guess I didn't associate with me. Like once it started, I was like, oh yeah, this had singing in it. I think that the ones that I remember the most were the ones where Charlie is singing with, I believe, was it Flo was the character, up in heaven, and the alligator song or crocodile song.
Oh, it's a different one that I remembered. I remembered "You Can't Keep the Good Dog Down," or the first one.
But like, I don't know, like listening to it, I kind of wish it didn't have the singing because Burt Reynolds cannot sing to save his life. So I'm like, it's so funny because like, again, this was right before the Disney Renaissance or whatever. It wasn't uncommon to have a speaking voice and a singing voice. For you look at like Aladdin had a speaking voice and actually singing voice. And, so you could get people who could act, but probably couldn't sing. And you get singers who might not be able to act or whatever. And so you're able to kind of fuse those. And every once in a while, you're able to get characters who, or actors who could do both, but it was more rare. The only real exception in Disney that I could really think of was in Beauty and the Beast. Like most of the cast did the singing as well, but man, Burt Reynolds was tough to listen to. Like there was a couple parts where it was okay, but he just cannot sing. And it made it really, really grating to the ears to listen, especially the Buddy Buddy song with Itchy at the beginning. Like neither one of them could, so it was just horrendous to listen to. Like the crocodile one, not so much. It wasn't too bad. I kept just thinking of like Princess the Frog and
I thought a lot about that
like
too,
Moana with I can't remember what his name is, but the crab.
Yeah,
like it's very much the same kind of setup.
Jermaine
like
Clement.
And is I don't know. Like to me, like I guess that's the reason why like I didn't really think about it as a musical, because none of it really stood out to me compared to other stuff I've heard since then in animated films. Like, is it the worst? No. I mean, The Rock's not singing in it, so it's not the worst. But
oh goodness,
you're welcome.
It's I could have done without it, to be honest.
I can't get away from the themes, but one of the things that surprised me looking at the adult nature of the film was just from the opening shots, and you get them trying to break out of a pound, and all of a sudden it's gunshots ringing and these gigantic gunshot holes as the bullets are missing them. I'm going, wow, there's a lot of gun action going on.
Mad Max version of Louisiana in the 30s.
Completely.
Like, man, what are pounds like in Louisiana, man? Like, that's crazy.
And so as we get to, and I guess I'm wondering for both of you, like, how did you feel about their portrayal of the violence that they were inherently sharing with us, i.e., Charlie's his first death, getting hit by the car, but you don't see him get hit by the car. So there was a question, did he drown or did he actually get hit by the car? Or we have a ray gun that lights him up.
The ray gun. The drive-by with the...
Yes.
That was definitely censored. That somebody saw that and was like, you're not going to get PG if you keep that as a Tommy. It was a Tommy gun. It was a Tommy gun. And what they say is a Flash Gordon ray gun or something.
Right.
Yes.
They went back.
They said.
like clearly leaving bullet holes in the apple cart behind them or whatever. Yeah, that was there was a shocking amount of violence, and probably not as bad as some of the other ones during this time period, but yeah, that was kind of weird to see the guns. Like you said, the opening sequence, that kind of threw me for. I did not remember that sequence at
No,
all.
neither did I.
Mm-hmm.
I completely forgot about that. And so seeing how strangely violent it was at the dog pound kind of threw me for a loop. And then, yeah, the car crash that happened again. I will say that whole setup for Charlie's death seemed wholly unnecessary. You could have done any number of things to kill him off aside from tying. Well, I don't know if they tied him up, but they blindfolded him drunk. This drunk dog is blindfolded and put at the bottom of the pier and used a car to run him off, and probably he drowned. He didn't even die from impact. So pretty dark for a kids movie. It's weird to think that I was 7 watching this.
No, I think you're nailing it. It's weird how these concepts go over your head. You think about all the kids movies you've watched, and I mean, I'll throw it back to Toy Story. And as an adult, when you realize, oh, they actually put some jokes in there that were definitely not for the kids,
bro, for sure.
And you're surprised by that, because as a kid, you probably, like, I'd find myself laughing along with the adults because there's a joke and you're like, oh, I'm just laughing too, but you have no idea. And this one, I think it still really, really surprised me, going, wait a second, like, what did I take away from this film as a kid?
Yeah, this is where, like, it's kind of an ongoing joke at this point, but the blaming of violence in media. Because I mean, like I said, you wouldn't see smoking dogs in anything nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Just the amount of adult stuff that's in here is not a new thing. But at the same time, like, did I grow up into a mobster because I watched this 50 times as a kid? I don't smoke, so clearly didn't get me to do that. I don't like gambling, so clearly didn't do that. But it's just that idea. Like, I'd be very interested to see what the reception from parents were during the time of, I don't know if maybe that was a time of innocence where you could do that kind of stuff and get away with it, but it feels like a threshold that you'd never see nowadays.
No, you're absolutely right. I could not imagine them making it, at least in this way. But maybe that leads us, is it time for a remake? Should they try to redo this film?
I mean, there were many sequels and a TV show, so they...
Oh, you're right. There were sequels and a TV show?
Yeah.
I may be leading the witness here about how I feel about this, but do we need a new version? Should they reboot this franchise?
I mean, I can only imagine
what you want to say.
I can only imagine that the sequels were, I don't believe I've seen them, but I can only imagine they were lighter in tone.
I mean, I guess it's kind of a funny thing because the end of this movie, I know they kind of left it open a little bit, but the main character is still dead at the end of this. So, well, I mean, in theory, it cuts off the possibility of sequels, but apparently they got around that. So,
well, there's a lot of dogs, the next dog in line.
Oh, wow. Just line them up, knock them down, send them to heaven, or maybe to hell. Oh,
man. Charlie Sheen was the voice actor for Charlie in the sequel.
Oh, all right. Maybe we do have something we need to watch. I do want to say, because this movie definitely met the criteria of Bobby this time length. You love that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely felt like, I mean, I don't know if the movie dragged in times for me, but it was just kind of like, I mean, I wouldn't say that, but I would say that it was just very unusual, and the way it transitioned from some scenes to other scenes, it was just kind of interesting watching. But I absolutely liked the fact that it was like under 90 minutes. I'm like, okay, I could watch almost any movie if it's under 90 minutes.
Almost.
That sounds like a challenge. That sounds like a challenge we must rise to.
No, never mind. I do not want to watch, like, what was it, like the Hungarian film, if it's like under 90 minutes or whatever. What was that?
Well, I mean, the reason I bring it up is with the ending, you mentioned the transitions. Did anyone feel like it just really cut off super quick?
You mean like
that
just
its
ended all of a
resolution.
sudden?
Yeah, it felt really fast to me. Like we had this demonic dog presence come over the land so he could, come to the end. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, here's Angel Dog, and it just or sorry, not even Angel Dog, but Angel Spirit Ball thing. And all of a sudden she's like, oh, Demon Dog is gone, and yay, goodbye. I love you. I'm in heaven.
I mean, it's not the most cut off ending I've ever seen in a film. But I guess it did kind of. This is where like I question the production and what happened behind the scenes and what the actual concept was. Like I feel like somebody heard the phrase "all dogs go to heaven" and they're like, "Oh, well, that's an interesting idea," and they kind of had some bits and pieces. And then, because like I think I mentioned it while we were watching or whatever, but the original concept for this was a noir detective canine story. And you can like
hence
that,
the darkness.
That would have felt. I felt like that would have mixed well with the look and the just the overall theming of the characters of the mobsters, and it honestly probably would have fit better with the personalities of Charlie and Itchy. To be honest, more so than what we ended up getting, because again, it was kind of a turnoff. The fact that 90% of the movie he's kind of a jerk. He's not even kind of. He was a jerk the entire time. He pretty much was just Carface with charisma. But yeah, I feel like it wasn't the worst cutoff. I feel like they did try to resolve it, but I think that they did the best they could with what was there. I don't, because what else would you do? I mean, it kind of jumped right to where it needed to be without dredging too much, because then it would have passed 90 minutes and Bobby would have vetoed this one. So
it's kind of like somehow I wanted it extended, which is just, that actually does sound a bit like pain for me to even want to flesh out the characters even more. But maybe, that's maybe a noir film version is what I was looking for to kind of dive in, because the characters were a bit that way. So I will ask about the animation. We don't watch necessarily a lot of animated films. How do you feel this holds up this many years later, Bobby?
It's amazing from a technical and visual standpoint to me. I mean, to me, like this hand-drawn animation, it's so labor intensive and just so, I mean, it's just incredible. And there were some scenes, like some of the stuff in the beginning where there was like 20 dogs in one shot, and someone had to hand animate each and every single one of those. So it was just at the beginning, it was just totally mind boggling just to watch some of that. And I did notice some of the, some of the Disney stuff, like the multiplane, where basically like in order to, like imply a perspective shift, they put the cells on, they film them far apart from each other, and they actually do move them so that you get a feeling of depth. And it was really amazing to see. I mean just the traditional hand animated art form is just, it's just incredible to me. And I mean, whether the movie is, like really, really great or not, it's just like, it's just an incredible piece of art, just seeing it as it is.
Do you think, I mean, for this many years later, do you feel like it holds up?
I mean, I think that in terms of the artistry, it's really amazing. The trick is that animation has really changed. And so when you look at this, you look and see like, okay, this is an animation that took place in this specific era.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely did like when they were in the first scene with Charlie and Carface in the clubhouse, and you had that light that was rotating around the room, and I didn't really understand how sometimes the light was passing over them, but other times it was passing behind them. I still have no idea how they did that. So I thought that was interesting. Anything animation wise that stood out for you, Matt?
I mean, it was very fluid animation. It's always interesting to go back and watch animated movies from this time period, just for the way that they're able to, and especially with humans, it's fairly easy to use rotoscoping and get that kind of fluid animation. With animals, obviously that's almost all hand done. I do think that there was a time period where you'd start seeing they'd use CG like bones essentially to do all the motion, and they would rotoscope over that. I think that the inking in it was very good. I mean, can hound on how dark it was visually, but I think that there was a lot of texture and tone put in it. There was a couple times where it was clear that they had a background and they were clearly just had like clear transparencies over it with the characters and stuff. You get these weird black outlines and shadows that they were doing, and it kind of stood out in a weird way. But visually, I think it does really well. I think that, as Bobby said, we've been trained to, see animation differently nowadays. So I can't imagine this movie in CG and still look as dark as it is. I don't know how it would work, but for what it is, I think it's good. I think people who are wanting to become animators or get into animation at all, I think it's an interesting study piece between this and, as much as bad as it was, Black Cauldron and Secret of the Nim and, Five Goes West and, Americans, all that stuff or whatever is great for that kind of history of animation.
So looking at it from that perspective, history of animation, knowing that we have a lot of dark themes going on in this film, Bobby, are you telling people to watch this today? Are you recommending this one?
No, I think Matt said it perfectly, where if you're a fan of animation and for a historical animation point of view, I think it's very interesting. But otherwise, the movie, frankly, made me feel a little bit uncomfortable with super immoral dogs and the kidnapped child. So I would say unless you like dogs kidnapping children, I say maybe skip this one.
I feel like that is not something you should like. Matt, do you recommend this film?
Well, clearly not to people who have kids. Just for the fear of the dogs kidnapping your child.
A dingo ate my baby.
No, that's exactly what I was thinking of. Honestly, probably not. I thought going into this that I was going to have a nostalgia trip watching it. I don't think it's a coherent enough story for somebody who hasn't seen it before to just watch it. Like I said, it is 90 minutes, but it felt longer than 90 minutes. When we hit the halfway point, I was like, oh, it's only 47 minutes in. Oh, that's tough. And people who, have seen it, I just don't think it's going to have the same, nostalgia factor that a lot of other things are going to have. I think there's a lot better movies to watch during this time period than this.
From animation? No, I agree with you. There's this, this is why I enjoy that we're doing this, because that nostalgia kick that we're trying to get from a lot of these films, going, oh yeah, remember this or that. And when it doesn't pan out, it's really interesting to kind of think, okay, well, what did I miss back then that I'm seeing now? Or, how our tastes have changed. So I'm in the same boat. This isn't exactly one that I'm recommending with any sort of thumbs up to join in. Yeah, okay, you're an animation student, cool. There's probably a lot of other things you can learn from. But story-wise, you actually probably watch it so you could learn how to write something better than dark dogs who kidnap kids. So, as always, thank you so much for listening. And remember, all dogs go to heaven because, unlike people, dogs are naturally good and loyal and kind.